Hi, I'm Macy.
And I'm Missy.
We're best friends
and business partners. And each week, we're going to bring you a quote that inspires us, and we're going to talk about it.
Join us as we break down our favorite impactful messages for leadership and share how you can apply them to lead with confidence and purpose.
Get ready for a fun and authentic journey into leadership, life, and everything in between.
Well, hey, bestie, it's our favorite day of the week.
It sure is. And I can't wait to dive in today and share this week's quote and, talk about it.
I mean, I have to say, we have been so blessed with having some amazing guests, more on the horizon. It's just been awesome.
It has been for sure. And I love that we get to do this together. And I love bringing in other leaders and hearing their perspective. And to have the level of conversation we've been having is so great.
I know. And it's been fun. Like, we're having a good time and learning.
We are having a good time and learning. So this week we are joined by John Bostain. He is our friend, Mayce, and he served in the U.S. Navy during the first Gulf War. He was an aviation electronics on a F-14 Tomcat, which is, yes, the airplane from the movie Top Gun. He has served as a police officer. He did that from 1994 to 2001 in Hampton, Virginia. He worked in the patrols, special investigations, the SWAT team, the police academy, the detective bureau. But this is what's cool. He was an instructor at the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center, Glencoe. Isn't that cool, Mayce?
Yeah. You know who's going to love this episode, honestly?
Your son,
my
Julian.
son, Julian. Yes. John, my son wants to be Secret Service. So this is going to be right up his alley to listen to you. Yeah.
Yes, I know lots of Secret Service agents over the years.
He trained them, Mayce. He trained
service
agencies, U.S. Marshals, NCIS, and agents and offices for more than 70 federal agencies. And now he is currently, and this is how we've met him, is through his work here, president and founder of Command Presence Training, which includes newly formed Command Presence Leadership.
Welcome. And
We're
first,
so glad you're here.
John, from both of us, thank you so much for your service. We appreciate what you have given to our country and your community. And we're excited. We're
I'm so excited. I'm so excited to spend time with you guys. And thank you for the opportunity. And and thank you for saying that, our service members are so important. I have to tell you that my son is currently serving as a U.S. Marine in Japan. And he will be home in Georgia in 2 days. So I could not have done this later in the week. And I honestly, after this, I think I'm going to check out the rest of the week, just focusing on getting my son home. Yes. We haven't seen him about a year and a half. So I'm so thankful and grateful to have the opportunity to talk to you guys today.
We're glad you worked us in that schedule.
Yeah,
right? Because we know that takes the importance of your life right now. So
absolutely.
We're really glad you're here.
So the quote that we're going to talk about today is this: if serving is below you, then leadership is beyond you. And this
a good one.
This quote is by one of the most famous author, probably the most famous author in the world.
Probably favorite too, Mayce.
Okay, probably. Anon. Otherwise known as Anonymous.
Yes, that Anon, he sure does have some great quotes, and I would say we use them often.
We do use them. Yeah, so this quote, I think, speaks to the heart of leadership, right? It has that servant leadership type of vibe.
Yeah, not all leaders, though. Let's just pause right here. Not all leaders are servant leaders. The great ones, though, usually are.
Yeah, if you're not familiar with the concept of servant leadership, this is what it is. Servant leadership means leading by helping others first, right? Instead of focusing on being in charge or being the one with power, a servant leader's main job is to support their team, making sure that their needs are met helping them grow and succeed. It's all about listening. It's about listening to people, caring about their well-being, putting others' needs in front of your own. It is the responsibility of the leader to ... We hear that. We say that often, right, Miss?
Yes.
It is the responsibility of a servant leader to create the environment where everyone can thrive and everyone feels valued.
Yes. And Macy, I would say that we are blessed to have so many servant leaders in our life, both as friends and as mentors. Yeah.
Yeah. I think you're right. And our guest today is one of those servant leaders,
For sure.
Which is why we are so excited to talk about this quote this week with him.
Yeah. And I mean, he just shared about his son serving in the military as well. Like they're a family full of servant leaders. And so, John, welcome again. We're so excited to dive into this quote with you today.
Yeah, it's a great quote. I love it. It's so important. It's one that I've used in the past, and it really encompasses really two different types of leaders. I would argue it really comes down to if you look at the books and the literature, but just the way we normally interact with people. You've got transactional leaders who rely heavily on title and power and things like that.
Yeah.
And then you've got transformational leaders, which servant leadership just happens to be a category. It's one type of transformational leader, yet it's all those things that Macy said, right? Their mindset. They're always looking for what's best for the organization, what's best for the people that they serve. And so there really is, there's not a whole lot of play either way. That's kind of the dichotomy, right? You're either relying upon power, title, and influence, or you're on this other side of transformational leadership. So this is something I love talking about because I think everybody listening has been on both sides. We've all been on both sides. And maybe even before we knew better, most of us have probably led from both sides. And so I think this is such an important topic. I'm glad that I get to, of all the topics, I'm glad I get to talk about this one today.
Wow,
we
you're
felt
already
it was perfect.
Doing so good. Yes.
We knew it was going to be a perfect one. So I have a question. So you've been in law enforcement, obviously, all these years, right? And you have seen, as you said, we've all been on both sides and seen all types of leaders. So in law enforcement specifically, what kind of difference do you think it makes when officers are led by servant leaders as opposed to leaders who lead from a power of position?
Yeah, that's such a great question. And I think we've got to just for a second pause for a second. There are times in law enforcement specifically, or fire services, or some of the public safety services, where we have to lead from power, but that's usually very limited. It's a critical incident. And for example, we have, unfortunately, we have things like active shooter events and things like that.
Sure.
And sometimes you just have to say, go do this right now. We have to do this. We have to enter. So that's a tactical situation. However, when we step back, then we're back to this transformational servant leadership should be the predominant style. But in my experience, it hasn't always been that way because law enforcement tends to be a paramilitary service, and the service has kind of been that way where rank and title over the years meant more. I'm happy to tell you, though, as I travel the country, especially working with law enforcement, I'm seeing this great shift towards this transformational leadership. And I think it's really important because servant leadership and transformational leadership, whatever title we're going to talk about, the most important thing it does is build trust, right?
Yeah,
that's the importance of leading that way. And if we want to raise up this new generation of law enforcement officer or any organization, whether it's public safety or not, you have to build trust. If you don't have trust, you're going to have a dysfunctional team. And so I think that part is really important. And from the law enforcement perspective is servant leadership, transformational leadership. It helps build trust. And listen, I mentioned, or I'm sorry, you mentioned, I've been on a SWAT team and I've worked narcotics. And the bottom line is that we have to be able to trust each other in those environments. It's the ultimate level of trust. And it's not like what people see in the movies and stuff like that. But one thing I think is accurately represented in TV and movies is that we have to trust each other. And so I think that's
if I can interrupt you just 1 second, John, I think, it's obvious in situations like life or death situations that you've got to trust each other, right? Like you were just saying that we're jumping out of a SWAT van or whatever that is. But in the workplace, for the average leader that isn't in law enforcement, don't you think it's a matter of trust there as well?
100%. Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Yeah, absolutely. Because, we say things too, is that sometimes people say, I just want to know my boss has my back. Right?
Yes, yes.
We hear people say stuff like that, right? Well, what they're really saying is, I want to be able to trust my boss. That's
Right.
That's what they're saying when they say that. And then, servant leadership also, when we talk about servant leaders, they have this ability to inspire, right? And by building trust, by inspiring, I would argue they have the ability to help increase innovation. When you do that, when you lead that way, you're going to get more out of your people. This is something I've seen, that when you are relying on title, power, things like that, you're going to get just a bare minimum out of people because of that lack of trust, right?
Yeah.
So if I'm telling people and talking to people, I'm like, hey, listen, if I'm trying to lay out the case for servant leadership, which sometimes we have to do, which is crazy, that one right there is by itself is, hey, you're going to get more out of your people through a servant leadership mindset, so that's one benefit right there that we should be thinking about.
And Missy and I always say, like, if we would tweet it, but we don't tweet. I think it's called X now, but regardless, we always say, which goes to your point, inspired people inspire people.
Right.
So if you're inspired and you lead that way, then your people are almost, they have permission to inspire. I want to ask though, because you said servant leadership is one way, or trust is one way, right? To make the case. What would be another reason to make the case besides trust? What would be something else that you would say for those, especially, in law enforcement, because you said there are some times that you have to lead from that positional leadership. What would be another benefit of someone in law enforcement leading from a servant leadership lens rather than a power position?
Yeah, so it's a great question. If we build trust, I think that leads directly to increases in innovation, and meaning we can challenge the status quo on things. And the reason that can happen is because I think servant leaderships empower their people to take chances on new ideas. I think one of the worst things that we can do from a leadership perspective is to keep people from being creative. It's funny, I'm actually currently working on a block of instruction right now that I've been developing for some conferences and for executive retreats on the topic of disruptive leadership. And that gets such a bad, disruptive sound. All I'm saying is that let's think differently about some of these things.
Right.
And some of the most disruptive people in the world, like Elon Musk, I think about him from the standpoint of that company just landed a spacecraft back on the same landing pad in an upright position about 6 weeks ago, something that's never happened in the history of the world. Well, how does that happen? Well, you have to be innovative. And if you don't have trust, if you're not a servant leadership kind of mindset, if you don't empower your people, you never get results like that. So to me, if you want to break the status quo, that is a positive element of servant leadership.
Yeah, we actually talked about that, Macy, on our very first podcast, if you remember, right? We talked about the fact that people are so scared of making mistakes that it holds them back from being innovative. So I love that point.
All right, let me ask you.
Leaders all the time. Oh, sorry. I just tell leaders all the time, let people take intelligent risks. Not be reckless, but let people take intelligent risks.
Oh, that's good. I like that.
Yeah, it's and there's a great book out there called The Right Kind of Wrong. And it's about that. It's about how can we help people take intelligent risks? And that's another thing I think a servant leader does. They allow people enough room to take an intelligent risk. And if it fails, no problem. We'll talk about it. And have you ever noticed that people are, this is crazy about law enforcement, is that when it comes to their personal safety, they are not risk averse at all, meaning they'll do things that they're not even qualified to do, like run into a burning building.
Right.
I mean, police officers don't do that, right? So when it comes, and they'll go into gun, we hear all the time, law enforcement will run to the sound of gunfire. So when it comes to their own personal safety, they are not risk averse at all. But my experience is sometimes when it just comes to trying a new idea, no, we've already heard that before. And I don't think it's unique to law enforcement. I think too many organizations are the same way. And we kind of joke about it. Why do we do it this way? Well, that's the way we've always done it. And I say that the second cousin to that is, oh, we've already tried that before. And so,
Yeah.
Yes, we
let's
hear
just,
it all the time in our
Yeah.
trainings and working with
yeah,
organizations. Yes.
Yeah.
yes. So I just say, listen, I think servant leaders they empower their people to take chances and take intelligent risks. And we're either going to succeed or we're going to learn, right? I mean, that's those are really the two outcomes.
Well, so let
Yes.
us ask you, because you just said empower, you said empower
Mhm.
a few minutes ago. And we know that in most organizations, right, Missy, most organizations, most leaders, regardless of industry, the leaders struggle with empowering their people,
We
right?
see it
But we
time
see it
and
all
time
the
again.
time.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, how do you overcome this, or how do you help others overcome this almost fear of empowerment?
Yeah. So again, it comes from trust, right? We know that. So we've got that as the baseline. But I'll share something with you. And I wish I'm going to have to chalk it up to anonymous because I don't know the source of it.
He's famous, so it's okay.
And I have been for years. I came across this years ago. It's something we do when we onboard people. And it's something I share with executives all over the country when I'm talking about empowerment. And what I tell them, something they call the 5 permissions. But I cannot tell you where it came from, who I got it from. If you're listening, please tell me it's yours because I want to give you credit. But this is a great way of thinking about how can I empower people. So when I onboard a new employee, I tell them, hey, you have my permission to do these 5 things. The first one is this: make the decision you think is the right decision to make. And I'm coming right out of the gate and say, hey, I'm going to allow you I hired you for a reason. I want you to make decisions. Now, if you don't know what to do, you can obviously ask, but I want you to make the decision you think is the right decision to make. So I'm already telling them right up front that I want you to take some chances and take some intelligent risks.
Yeah.
So that's the first one. The second way I talk about that second permission, I said, start something that needs to be started. And that's an empowering phrase because, sometimes people in our organizations, they look around and they see something and they think to themselves, well, somebody ought to do something about that. Yeah, it's you.
Right.
Yeah. That's
Someone.
innovation. That's
Right.
taking the step. Yes.
Right. And so I'm giving them permission to do that, right? That by using this language, I've given you permission to do that. And it's so funny. I told my son, I said, Danny, if you want to be a great Marine, all you have to do is just look around at what's not being done and do it, and you're going to look like a rock star. Well, that's true for most organizations, right?
Yes.
So the third one, I say, hey, the third permission is ask for help whenever you want it. I think that is a liberating statement, meaning too oftentimes people get buried and they won't ask for help until they need it, or they're way behind, or things are falling apart. To empower somebody, I want to say, hey, ask whenever you want help, regardless of what it looks like, just ask. Just ask, and we're going to be there for you. Now we've got all these interlocked ideas of trust building and things like that. The fourth permission is this: help others even when they don't ask. So,
Love that one.
oh my
Yes.
gosh, it's my favorite one. When people on my team know that I'm falling behind on something, this is the way they say it. Hey, John, can I take that off your plate for you? It's my favorite thing for them to ask me because the answer is always going to be yes. It's always going to be yes.
Here you go.
Yes. What else would you like? And so, again, very empowering thing for us as a team. And then last thing, from an empowerment standpoint, I tell people that you have my permission. I'm the owner of the company. You have my permission to take time off to do something that energizes and inspires you, because I don't want you just thinking about work all the time. I want to engage with you. I want to know what your passions are. Hey, if it's running a marathon, what can I do to help you achieve that? Oh, you need some time off to train. Okay, great. You want to go serve, at our soup kitchen, whatever. I say, hey, you have my permission to take time off to do something that inspires, excites, and energizes you. And so I love these 5 permissions because I think leaders that are giving their folks permission to do those things, that's empowerment right there.
Yes, that
And
is
what I
so
love,
good.
Missy, I don't know if you're thinking the same thing. I'm sure you are because we share one brain sometimes. But all of these things that John had mentioned about being empowerment things, they're really connection things.
They are.
Right? Like you are empowering your people, but at the same time, you're connecting with them, especially that last one, right? Like, hey, if you need time off, I'm here to support you. Then you're finding out what's important to them.
That's right.
Because they're saying, I need time off because of XYZ. Oh, I didn't know you run marathons. I mean, we're going a little off, but that's what we train. That's what we teach mostly,
Exactly.
right, Missy, is empowerment and connection and how those two things go hand in hand. I think John just displayed that so perfectly.
Yes, and I hope our listeners were taking notes because that was pure gold.
Yeah. I don't
And
know. We may have to put like a document or something in the show notes about it
maybe
because
so.
I don't want them
Because
to
it's
miss
that
it.
good.
It's
Yeah,
that
it's
good.
really
Yeah.
good. And John, I also think that great leaders, servant leaders, as we are talking about, they lead by example, right? I mean, some
Yeah.
people may not even be familiar with servant leadership until they've seen it played out.
Mhm.
Servant leaders really lead well by demonstrating, I think, that like no task is beneath them.
That's right.
Right.
Yeah.
When
Right.
it benefits, it's not beneath them if it benefits the team or the mission or the company or the organization or that individual player. And so obviously, we don't work in law enforcement as a whole, but what's the leadership vibe there? Like, right? Like, would you say servant leadership is how the agency is run, or what's the vibe in law enforcement?
The best way to answer that is that it's changing for the better. That's
Okay.
that's the honest answer. And because I get to teach, I do so many leadership events across the country, and of course, it's not hard to figure out where I fall on this category of transactional versus transformational servant
Yes.
leadership. So this is part of what we're doing. And the truth is that my experience in law enforcement leadership from chiefs and sheriffs and everybody, they understand how important this is because they understand that when sometimes I talk about the difference between an inward versus outward mindset. There's so many ways to look at this, right? But a shift towards an outward mindset, which is what servant leadership is. Servant leadership's always looking about what are the stressors and needs and hopes and dreams of the people I'm serving, and that's what an outward leader does. And so I'm seeing this great shift towards transformational leadership, servant leadership. And the other thing is because I think people are starting to figure out that by doing that, there's all these other connected ideas, such as building great culture, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
When I build great organizational culture, well, now I'm addressing things like police community relations. If I have a police department full of people who love their job, they love the people, they love where they work, there's a natural carryover to how they interact with citizens, right? And
Yes.
so there's a huge side of that. The other part is the biggest challenge facing law enforcement right now, this is just universal, is
Okay.
recruiting and retention. It is the single biggest challenge.
Yeah.
We're having a hard time finding people to come into the profession. And now people have started, agencies say, hey, we're going to give you this $25,000 signing bonus, and people are stealing people from other agencies and things like that. And what I've been talking about is, hey, if you have extraordinary culture, it's really hard to poach from you, even if people have a lot of money.
Yes.
Yes.
I'm going to argue.
We train about that, Missy.
Yep.
I mean, we go into companies and we find out like you need to figure out why people love working here. You
Yes.
need to zone in on that because if you know why they love working, they're not going to leave for to go to a different organization because again, you've connected with them. You
Yeah.
understand them.
There's a quote about all of that, you two. It's, so many organizations and companies are focused on the vision. And there's something that was said maybe by John Maxwell that said, culture eats vision for lunch.
Absolutely.
Right? It's so important. So I have a question, kind of a follow-up question, John. What advice then would you give to someone in leadership about embracing that servant mindset? You talked about mindset, especially in those high pressure type environments.
Yeah, so I think the advice is again, going back and sharing the benefits of it. So higher morale is one, right? So that directly impacts wellness, our families, things like that. The other thing it directly impacts, obviously, is the way we interact with the community. Kind of mentioned that. And it also, you can understand, those of us who've gotten into law enforcement, I haven't been an active police officer for a while. I still serve by teaching, and I'm involved in law enforcement. But there's a very strong sense of purpose and a strong sense of why. Those who choose the public safety profession don't do it for money. You've probably heard that. People don't join the military because they're going to get rich or anything like that. And so the most important thing is understanding, having a powerful why. And that's where that service comes from. So it doesn't matter what situation we're dealing with, whether it's a high risk or if it's an everyday type of contact, a strong sense of purpose and a strong sense of why feeds into that service mindset. And honestly, it's almost universal. I can't imagine somebody getting into this profession and taking the risks and stuff unless they were absolutely a service-minded person.
Yeah. Let me ask you this, though, because you just mentioned, obviously, we know that the demands are really high, right? And often require those split-second decisions that have great impact on a lot of people. How does the mindset of service then guide you in those very critical moments, would you say?
Yeah, because I think because it directly correlates to this concept that it's not about me. When a police officer, firefighter, whatever, regard EMS, doctors in emergency rooms, things like that, then we have this fundamental understanding that it's never about us.
Yeah.
And that's the ultimate in servant leadership, I think, is that that means you are literally, I'm only there for the service of other people. There's a topic, I'm sure you guys have heard about it, the topic of de-escalation. People talk about it all the time. And there's a lot of misunderstanding about what it is and what it isn't, what you can and what you cannot do. But when we teach de-escalation, and I don't care what the scenario is, my thought always is, what does this person need from me right now?
Oh, I like that. That's a great question to apply in any organization, anywhere.
Yeah.
What does this person need from me right now?
I love that.
I do too.
And that's how so sometimes we come across somebody who's severely mentally ill, and they may be a threat to themselves. So this person needs some mental health intervention or medical services, right? Sometimes, unfortunately, what does this person need? They need us to be able to take them into custody to get them the help that they need, right? And so that's kind of the approach. And again, so I think this is to go back to when we're thinking about critical incidents and things like that, whether it's going into a school in an active shooter or whatever it might be, the thing when we're handling domestics, it's the same concept, right? A domestic, what does this person need from me right now?
Yes.
Now, let's be honest. In law enforcement, sometimes what's needed is the person has to be arrested. That's the part that people don't like. I get it, but sometimes that's what people need. And sometimes, when we have people, that's why I'm a big fan of alternate programs and stuff for drug users and stuff like that. Because if I take somebody in custody for a drug arrest, what this person probably needs is some type of intervention and some help and stuff like that. So it's this concept, at least for me, and I think a lot of the folks in law enforcement, my goal when I'm out interacting with people as a police officer is simply, what does this person need right now? And am I able to give it to them? Because
so good.
Guess what? If I'm not, then okay, cool. Then now my job becomes, what resources do I have to get them what they need? That's kind of the way I look at it.
So I have a question. I'd love to know how has your understanding of leadership evolved since transitioning out of law enforcement, and what role does service play in your life now?
Wow. What? How long do we have?
Not very long.
So let me share a real quick story because I think it answers your question. How's it changed? When I became a patrol supervisor, so I went to midnight shift, I had been at the police academy as an instructor for 2.5 years. So I hadn't even been out on patrol working regularly. So I get back, and I think the biggest thing that I realized is that when I got to patrol, I didn't have any leadership training. I had never had any formal leadership training or anything like that. And I relied completely on position. If you are familiar with Maxwell's law, 5 levels of leadership, I was the ultimate positional leader. And I just didn't know any better. And I didn't have trust with my people, even though a lot of them are people I trained in the academy. But you got to remember, police academy environment, yelling and screaming, all that.
Right.
Well, that rebuild a lot of trust with these people. Now I'm their supervisor. And so I think that was the catalyst for me. And this goes back to 1999, probably right around 1999, 2000, where I realized I needed to become a student of leadership. And even back then, even without having the tools or the language, I realized I was very transactional, very positional back then. And so I became a student of leadership, and the service part literally is just a mindset that shifted. Hey, instead of looking inward, it's not about me. It's always about the people that I'm leading and serving. And so I think that's fundamentally, that's exactly what transformational leadership is. That's what servant leadership is. It is always looking out for what's best for the organization and what's best for the folks that I have the privilege of leading. Yeah. And here's the thing. Some people don't like that idea. They're like, hey, but what about me? When do I get mine? You get yours by serving others.
Yes, absolutely. It's the secret.
Yeah, you're going to get it. The reward is in service, right? Whether it's in our churches, our communities, our businesses, the reward itself is the actual giving, right? So I think that's important. And I think that probably motivated me to become a student of, I've so much time. I spent a lot of time reading books and listening to podcasts and stuff like that, and trying to learn as much as possible so that honestly, my primary goal is to share with other people, right?
Sure.
And our mission statement at our organization is to educate and empower people everywhere so they can serve others.
I love that.
That's great.
Missy, John has said a couple of times, it's not about me. And it reminds me of when you share when your boys were little and, you were going somewhere and you would have to say, boys, remember, repeat after me. It's not about me. And then you taught that to me. And then I would say that to my kids.
I mean, it was an everyday occurrence. Yes.
Right?
Repeat after me. It's not about me. Yeah.
So as we kind of wrap up, John, I have a question. What is one action step that our listeners can take right now without a lot of thought, right? What's one thing that they could do to embody the idea that serving is truly a foundation of leadership?
Great question, Macy.
Whoa, man, I'm usually really prepared. I think the one step that you take is find an opportunity to serve.
Ooh, that's so good.
Nice. And pretty easy. There's places to serve everywhere
every day.
You look.
Like right now, not right now. Finish listening to the episode and then go out and serve.
Yeah. Right? Especially and I hate when we talk about leaders as, title, position, stuff like that. And I think, because leadership's about influence, right?
Yes.
And so look, just literally wherever you are listening to this, just think, where's an opportunity to serve in your community, in your home.
Right.
Sometimes and you don't have to do this grand gesture. Just look, go serve your neighbor by sit down and have a conversation and find out how they've been because you haven't talked in a while. I mean, I think the action step is find a place to serve.
That's
I
so
think
good.
That's it.
And you know what? At the end of the day, I feel like the world in general would be so much more of a peaceful place if we would all do that, right? Like when people lead and live with that servant's heart rather than a power position or trying to outdo one another, I feel like it would bring such a sense of calm in the world.
Don't we need that, right? Like if leaders would just figure out, it's not that hard, but figure out prioritizing how to serve their team, create that atmosphere of trust, right? That John was talking about earlier, then really what happens, it's that ripple effect that employees feel valued, they feel supportive, they then naturally become more relaxed and their anxiety is brought down. It brings this sense of safety. And guess what? Then that really does fall into their home life too. Like if I feel relaxed at work, chances are when I leave those work doors and I go home, I'm bringing that sense of calm with me instead of like this crazy, chaotic, anxious
Yes. And I think you've
feeling.
got to bring that sense of servanthood home too.
Oh,
Yeah.
of course.
Right. And Macy, to piggyback on what you were saying, I think when people are feeling that they're also going to feel seen and heard, and it's going to bring collaboration rather than what you get in that environment of positional power,
Yeah.
which feels more like a me versus you type environment.
Yeah.
All right. So, John, we're wrapping up. Anything else you want to share about serving others?
Like one last really good nugget about
we've had so
serving others.
many.
We've had so many. I know we're asking for a lot.
It sounds so simple, and I apologize to be so cliche, but the reality is if it just comes down to thinking, asking yourself daily, probably throughout the day, how can I add value to people? I mean, and again, I'm a big John Maxwell fan, and so the biggest thing I learned is just how can I add value to people? And there's a great book called The Outward Mindset by Arbiter Institute. I'm such a big fan of the work that those guys do, and I've got some friends over there, and they talk about this concept. They say, see people as people and not as objects. What they mean by that is, sometimes in our day-to-day lives, if we're passing some homeless person that's on the street, or we pass and we think, oh, that's just a homeless person. Well, in that moment, we're seeing people as objects, not as the person that has value, who might be somebody's father. And we do this, unfortunately. We do a lot of this. We tend to judge people sometimes, and when we do that, we're seeing them as objects and not for the people that they are. And so I think when we embrace this concept of how do I add value to people, there's opportunities all over the place, whether it's our coworkers. And that's what I think too, right? If I'm not a supervisor, I don't have title or position, I can still add value to my supervisor. Right?
Absolutely.
I can add value to my peers. I can add value to my family. I can add value. So to me, as cliche as it sounds, I think the golden nugget is look for ways every day to add value to people.
Yeah, so good. So for our listeners, if you only take away one thing from today's episode, let it be this. Leadership is about humility. It's about vulnerability. And if you're too proud to serve, you are not ready to lead others.
So good. Leadership is about leaving your ego at the door.
It is.
And for our listeners, we've got a special gift. And John, you didn't even know this, but you created a great segue to our gift, because the gift is a guide for adding value. It's a leader's guide for adding value. Macy and I came up with this, and it's a week-long guide filled with simple, actionable items designed to help you make a real impact on the lives of those on your team, those you live with and work with. And so,
can I get a copy of that?
Absolutely.
Yes, we'll get it to you.
Let us tell you how you can get it. If you're ready to see what a difference that 1 week of adding value can make, you're going to be able to grab your copy. It'll be in the show notes, of course, or you can email us at connect@impactfulmessages.com and we'll send you the link.
And also let us know what you think about this week's quote. Do you agree that regardless of industry, that you as the leader should always lead with a servant's heart? Share your thoughts with us on social or in the comments. We really do want to know.
John, thank you. Thank you for serving us today. And our listeners, thank you so much for joining us. If our listeners want to stay connected with you, or if there's anything else you're up to and you want to share, how can they do that?
Yeah, the easiest way is just go visit our website, cp-leadership.com. So
okay, perfect. And we'll put that in the show
CP stands
notes
for command
too.
presence. Yep. cp-leadership.com.
Got it. All right, John, as we wrap up today, what is your favorite leadership quote? Your favorite of all time?
Oh, so there's a million, but kind of on this topic, I think it's probably this. Your true worth is determined by how much more you give in value than you take in payment.
Ooh, that's good.
That comes from Bob Berg, the Go-Giver. And the Go-Giver series, fantastic. So that one really resonates with me.
So good. And do you have a favorite leadership quote? Let us know that, and we may spotlight it on a future episode.
We'll be back next week with another quote and more leadership insights. And you know what we're going to do?
We're going to talk about it. Bye,
Bye,
bestie. Bye, John.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.
We want to thank you for listening. If you're enjoying this podcast, please show us some love by clicking the 3 dots to download the podcast. Leave us a 5-star rating on your podcast app and talk about it with other leaders to help them find the show from any of the major podcast apps. We'd love for you to follow us on social media too. Mpactful with an M _messages on Instagram and Mpactful Messages on LinkedIn.